I have a budget worksheet where if you have the pre-construction course, you have that budget worksheet. Nothing fancy. I made it up. It has all of the construction divisions, and I just go through on every job, right? And I take these plans and I sit down and I go through all these divisions I have: general requirements, permit fee, engineering design, pressure washing, temp sanitary facilities, dumpster for concrete, protection, site work, excavation, on and on and on. And I look at the design and I look at the project and I start putting numbers to those things. And these at this point are wags and swags, wild ass guesses, scientific wild ass guesses. They're based on quantities. And this is somewhat of my second iteration of the budgeting at this point, right? Because I did this to ensure that our napkin numbers were right, throwing numbers at her. We weren't that far off. But then as the design progresses, you're able to refine that. So I go through this spreadsheet. I look at the design, I look at the scope of work, and I start putting numbers to this. And those numbers may be based on unit costs. They could be based on the time that I think it's going to take, if we're self-performing, if there's markups. But I go through all of the plans and I just go through line item by line item and I look and I say, okay, landscaping. What do we have to do with landscaping on this job? I have grading of the backyard. I have seed. I have site prep, clearing, removal of existing plant material. I'm going to need 6 tons of blended screen topsoil. And I'm going to have to put a tri-fescue blend seed with a germinating seed down. I'm going to need starter fertilizer. So I look and I say, how much is that going to cost me? How much time that's going to take? And I put a number on it. I look at crushed concrete. I need 10 tons of crushed concrete delivered. What's that going to cost me? And then I look at excavating the footings. I'd write a scope of work in: labor to excavate 8 quantity concrete footings, sonotubes, crushed stone, footings for stairs. Assume a day with 2 guys. Assume no rock or no stone, and standard digging. So I'm putting all of these clauses in to protect myself, because I've gone to dig before and I've hit stone and it's taken 2-3x what I thought it was going to. So I'm putting an exact quantity of time, an exact cost associated with that, and an explicit scope to protect myself for when the work gets done. Place the footings. I have how many bags of concrete I'm going to be using for these 8 footings. Sonotubes, spread footings, all those costs. I have drainage, rental equipment, rental material, demolition, concrete, right? I assume that we're removing 20 tons of concrete. We ended up removing 30 because there was additional concrete brick footing material underneath the slab in the backyard that was unaccounted for in my cost proposal. So I have a note there that we removed and disposed of and recycled an additional 10 tons of concrete. So my dumpster number for concrete is inaccurate now. The labor to remove the concrete is inaccurate now. And we also had to bring in fill to account for all of the extra material that we removed. So all of these things help me create a really accurate cost budget for these projects. And that's what I'm trying to do. I understand that I'm going to walk into a job the day I start it, and it's not going to go exactly according to plan. I understand that my budget is made up of wags and swags. I understand that there's no perfect science to this, but I want to be able to communicate that to my clients that, hey, I'm putting a budget together, but I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know if it's going to rain. I don't know that we're going to run into 10 additional tons of concrete. I don't know that we're not going to be able to get the lumber delivery in the backyard because the equipment can't turn that way to get it in. So I'm going to have to hand offload all of the pressure treat and all of the framing lumber into the backyard. Things maybe I can account for, maybe I should have, maybe I forgot, maybe I missed it. Maybe there's extra I accounted for on something else that I didn't use that I can use to cover the cost of unaccounted for. But I'm always just trying to put a spreadsheet together, put a comprehensive scope together, a line item budget, and a schedule to give me the most accurate costing, scheduling, and budget that I can going into this job, so that it affords me an opportunity to manage this job to meet my clients' expectations. Does that mean that I'm going to spend $1,000 exactly on transportation, staging, delivery, diesel and gas, right? Is that I'm going to spend $1,000 on fuel? Maybe. Maybe I spend 1,100. Maybe I spend 600. But I'm going to keep track of what my fuel costs are. And if this client wanted to spend X amount, I'm going to make sure that all of these numbers wind up being close to X amount on that job. That's not to say that every single item in this budget is going to be exactly as anticipated, but I'm creating a budget that allows me and affords me to be able to manage this budget as well as I can to meet my client's expectations. There's a lot of unforeseens. I put a contingency in there. If I'm making an assumption, I note those assumptions. I do not, if there's no scope, if there's no spec written, I write a spec, I write a scope. And the reason is because I want something to fall back on. If there's no electrical scope from my electrician and I say, hey, this is what it costs to rough in this porch, right? It's $6,000, but I don't have a scope from him. What happens when what he bid on the plans or what he does is different? I then cannot go to my client and say, hey, you know what? We assumed that we were going to put 3 GFIs in and there was going to be 2 fans and we were putting a sub panel for the heaters and there was extra cost associated with that because we ended up having to do more work. We put in 8 GFIs because the ones on the house were waterlogged and damaged and they weren't working. When we got into your panel, we found that some of the wiring was not up to code and they had undersized wiring in larger breakers. So we had to replace all of that. I don't have a leg to stand on with my clients if I don't have an explicit and specific comprehensive scope of work from every subtrade and every single line item in this budget for this job. So if my electrician runs into these things and my client says, hey, well, he had the plans, he should have known, he visited the job, he should have known, and I don't have an exact scope that I'm bidding, he kind of has to eat that, or I have to eat that, or I have to make my customer very unhappy by saying, hey, this is an additional cost. So as I'm going through my line item budget, I'm going to note everything that may be a potential issue for me, that may be a concern. And even as I'm going through and I'm billing, I'm noting what was more, what was less. So I'm looking at this right now, right? One of the things is having my equipment, my excavator on site. There was an extra day of concrete demo. I noted that on there. If the job is more expensive than anticipated and it's a bunch of these little costs coming together, I understand why. It's because this was more. It's because there was an extra demolition fee. It's because the framing didn't work out the way that they want. The tie-in didn't work out because what was designed on paper didn't actually work in the field and we had to make a change. But I have an option to do that. I can either borrow money from within the budget. I can have a conversation with the client. They can spend more money, or I could possibly reduce some scope in the back end or create some efficiencies within the job to get that done still for the price. And maybe it's not the same scope of work that we bid, but I'm still meeting their program, which maybe their program's money. Maybe their program's just getting it done when you said you were going to get it done. Or maybe their program is just having it be the nicest, most badass screened in porch edition, and they don't really care about how long it takes or what it costs. They just want what they want. So you have to understand, in order to have a successful job, you have to understand how to manage it. What's the most important to these clients? Is it timeline? Is it budget? Is it quality? What are you managing to? I'm going through the scope of work right now. I have a rear storm door. I have an allowance in there for that. I need to determine which one she wants. That's something that I didn't have answers for, that I didn't have a spec for, that I didn't have a scope for. So I either need to write a spec and put a number on there, or I need to know I don't have a spec. I need to determine that still. So the number that I have in there is going to cover me pretty close for what I think she wants, but it's not 100%. I go and I take all my specs from my subcontractors. I put them in there. If there's materials that she's considering possibly pulling from the scope, like the porch heaters, like the skylights, they are noted in a different color font to make sure, hey, if you want to reduce the price of this job, here's some things that we can pull out to make this job fit your needs and your program and still meet your expectations. I have notes in here that I'm going through when I'm looking at the deck and I'm looking at the size of the boards that we have, right? And which direction the boards are going. And if we don't want a picture frame in the center, or we don't want a border in the center, that I need to make sure that this deck is less than 16 feet wide, or else we're going to have to piece it. So there's just little things that I'm noting that, yeah, may be common sense. But if I don't have that conversation with the client and they want it to be 18 feet, that maybe I can't get 18 footers and I'm going to have to put blocking in. I'm going to have to add, I'm going to have to let in a divider, all cost time, all cost money. Maybe there's some additional waste that I'm paying for. So I need to account for all of these things in the job. And I'm using this budget, this spreadsheet, in order to estimate this.